After 16 months overseas, I finally came home to see Grandpa's house, my only inheritance. Turning onto Maple Street, my heart stopped. Bulldozers crushed the last wall as dust filled the air. A bright sign stood over the rubble: Future Site, Wilkins Luxury Mall. My bag dropped from my hand as my homecoming turned into a nightmare. Before we start the video, please comment down from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe. My name is Captain Khan, and serving as an intelligence officer in the United States Air Force has been my life for the past decade. But Grandpa's Victorian-style house on Maple Street was where my soul truly lived. Before deploying overseas, I had promised my grandfather I would preserve his legacy. This house has seen 3 generations, Amir, he would say, his weathered hands pointing to marks on the doorframe tracking my growth. One day it will see many more. When he passed away just before my deployment, the house became mine, along with all its memories. I had arranged everything meticulously: mortgage payments automated, property taxes scheduled, a local management company handling routine maintenance. Grandpa had taught me to be thorough, and I'd honored his memory by ensuring his house would be waiting for me when I returned. The taxi dropped me at the corner of Elm and Maple. I decided to walk the last block, wanting to savor the moment of homecoming. The familiar neighborhood sense of jasmine and freshly cut grass filled my lungs. Mrs. Peterson's rose garden was in full bloom as always, and old Mr. Jenkins still had his antique Chevy parked in the driveway. Some things never changed, and that thought comforted me deeply. But as I rounded the corner where Grandpa's Victorian should have dominated the street, my heart stopped. Construction equipment surrounded the property. Half the house was gone, walls exposed like an open wound, windows removed, and workers swarming over what remained. My duffel bag slipped from my shoulder and hit the sidewalk with a dull thud. This couldn't be happening. "Hey, you can't be here," shouted a man in a yellow hard hat, stepping toward me. I ignored him, moving closer in shocked disbelief. "This is my grandfather's house," I managed to say, military discipline barely containing the tremor in my voice. "Who authorized this demolition?" The foreman looked uncomfortable, consulting his clipboard. "Sir, according to my paperwork, this property was sold through an HOA auction about 3 months ago. New owners want to rebuild completely." He hesitated. "You might want to speak with Sunridge Valley HOA. They handled the sale." Auction? Sale? None of this made sense. I picked up my bag mechanically, mind racing. Mrs. Lombardi, Grandpa's neighbor for 20 years, was watering her garden across the street. When she saw me, her face fell and she hurried over. "Oh, Amir," she said, voice thick with emotion. "I've been trying to reach you for months. That horrible HOA woman, Patricia Wilkins, she pushed through some ridiculous violations and then auctioned your grandfather's house. I tried to stop her, but she wouldn't listen. My training kicked in: gather intelligence, assess the situation, formulate a plan." "When did this happen?" "About 3 months ago. They claimed unpaid HOA fees and some garbage about code violations. I knew it was wrong. They sent notices to an empty house instead of contacting you directly." Mrs. Lombardi's eyes welled with tears. "They sold it for practically nothing. I heard it was only $12,000. $12,000? My grandfather's house was worth at least $450,000. The crushing weight of betrayal pressed against my chest. Did anyone try to reach me through military channels? That woman said she had no obligation to chase down absentee homeowners. Those were her exact words. I told her you were serving overseas, but she didn't care." I thanked Mrs. Lombardi, promising to keep her updated. Within an hour, I stood in the stale, colorless office of Sunridge Valley HOA administration. The receptionist directed me to a small conference room where a thin woman in a tailored blazer sat reviewing documents. "Patricia Wilkins?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. She looked up, professional smile firmly in place. "Yes. And you are?" "Captain Amir Khan, United States Air Force Intelligence. Owner of 1142 Maple Street, or at least I was, until you illegally sold my property while I was deployed overseas." Her smile faltered slightly. "Ah, Mr. Khan. We followed all proper procedures. Multiple notices were sent regarding violations and unpaid fees. When there was no response, foreclosure was the natural next step." "Show me these violations," I demanded, setting my service cap on the table between us. With practiced efficiency, she produced a folder. Inside were photographs and citations: $180 for grass exceeding regulation height, $95 for peeling paint on a windowsill, $250 for an unapproved mailbox repair, and $375 in unpaid quarterly fees. Less than $900 total. You auctioned a $450,000 home for $900 in minor violations? The absurdity was staggering. Actually, Patricia said with rehearsed nonchalance, legal fees raised the total considerably. But yes, per our bylaws, this was completely legal. You sent notices to an empty house, knowing the owner was deployed overseas. You never attempted to reach me through military channels. Do you understand how unethical this is? Her expression hardened. We have no legal obligation to chase down absentee homeowners. It's their responsibility to keep up with their dues and property maintenance. I'm not absentee, I replied, my voice dangerously calm. I'm a service member deployed in defense of this country. You knew that, didn't you? Patricia's eyes flickered away momentarily. Military deployment doesn't automatically exempt homeowners from our bylaws. We did everything according to procedure. I leaned forward, fixing her with the level stare that had broken hardened operatives. You took advantage of my absence while serving this country to seize a valuable property over trivial violations. Do you honestly believe hiding behind procedure makes this acceptable? She shifted uncomfortably but recovered quickly. Perhaps you should consult a lawyer, Captain Khan. This conversation isn't productive anymore. I stood, replacing my cap with deliberate calm. Oh, I intend to. And not just any lawyer. Walking out into the bright afternoon sunlight, I pulled out my phone. Training in intelligence work teaches you to maintain useful connections and understand systems from the inside. I scrolled to a particular contact, Major Sarah Reynolds, a JAG officer who specialized in Service Members' Civil Relief Act violations. As I waited for her to answer, rage and determination battled within me. This wasn't just about a house. This was about Grandpa's legacy, about honoring promises, about justice for those who serve their country only to have their lives dismantled in their absence. Sarah, I said when she answered, I need your help. It's about the Service Members' Civil Relief Act. 2 days later, I sat across from Major Reynolds in her office at the nearby Air Force Base. Her walls were lined with law books and framed commendations. She reviewed the documents I'd collected, her expression growing increasingly troubled. This is outrageous, Amir, she said finally. They've clearly violated multiple provisions of the SCRA. Selling a deployed service member's property without a court order? This is precisely what the act was designed to prevent. Hope flickered within me for the first time since my return. So we can get my grandfather's house back? Sarah leaned back, her expression thoughtful. It's complicated. The demolition creates additional challenges. We can't simply restore property that's been substantially altered. But we can pursue significant damages, possibly triple the home's value. And there's potential for criminal charges against the HOA leadership for willful violations of federal law. She tapped her pen against the desk, thinking. There's something else bothering me about this case. The sale price, $12,000 for a property worth $450,000, suggests something more than simple HOA overreach. Did you note who purchased the property? I hadn't thought to ask. The foreman mentioned new owners, but I didn't get names. Let's find out, Sarah said, reaching for her keyboard. Property sales are public record. 20 minutes later, we stared at the screen in disbelief. The buyer was listed as Wilkins Development LLC. Wilkins, I repeated. Like Patricia Wilkins, the HOA president? Sarah nodded grimly. I think we need to dig deeper. Over the next week, we uncovered a disturbing pattern. Sunridge Valley HOA had foreclosed on 5 properties in the past 2 years, all sold at fractions of their value, all purchased by Wilkins Development LLC. 4 of the 5 owners had been elderly in care facilities or deployed military personnel. Further investigation revealed that Wilkins Development was owned by Patricia's husband, Charles Wilkins. Their plan, outlined in permit applications filed with the city, was to demolish the existing homes and build luxury townhouses. This isn't just an SCRA violation, Sarah said as we reviewed our findings. This is organized fraud. They deliberately targeted vulnerable homeowners who couldn't defend their properties. Armed with this evidence, we filed a comprehensive lawsuit against Patricia Wilkins, the HOA, and Wilkins Development. When local media caught wind of the story, an Air Force intelligence officer returning from deployment to find his grandfather's home stolen through predatory practices, public outrage was immediate. Veterans groups organized protests outside the HOA offices. Former neighbors came forward with testimony about Patricia's targeted harassment of elderly and military families. The City Council launched an investigation into permit irregularities for Wilkins Development's projects. 3 months into the legal battle, we received an unexpected ally. Jessica Turner, Patricia's former assistant at the HOA, contacted Sarah with damning information. They knew exactly what they were doing, Jessica told us in Sarah's office, nervously twisting a tissue in her hands. Patricia kept a list of target properties, homes owned by people who wouldn't be able to fight back. When I saw your grandfather's address added after you deployed, I objected. That's when she fired me. Jessica had kept copies of internal emails and meeting minutes showing explicit discussions about targeting deployed service members' homes. In one particularly damning email, Patricia had written, "Military deployment creates perfect opportunities. Owners are unreachable and by the time they return it's too late." With Jessica's evidence added to our case, the prosecutor's office launched a criminal investigation for fraud and racketeering. The pressure became too much for the Wilkins empire. Cracks began to show. Charles Wilkins approached us through his attorney, offering a settlement, full restoration of my grandfather's property, a substantial cash payment, and an agreement to testify against his wife in exchange for reduced charges against himself. He claims Patricia masterminded the scheme, Sarah explained as we discussed the offer. Says he just went along with it. Classic rat deserting the sinking ship. I considered the proposal, thinking of Grandpa's words about the house seeing future generations. I want the house rebuilt exactly as it was, I insisted. Every detail, every molding, every floorboard. And I want systems in place to ensure this never happens to another service member or elderly homeowner. The settlement negotiations took weeks, but finally, 6 months after my return from deployment, I stood before a federal judge as she delivered her verdict. The court approves the settlement agreement between Captain Khan and the defendants. The foreclosure and sale of the property at 1142 Maple Street are deemed null and void. Wilkins Development is ordered to restore the property to its original condition according to the architectural plans submitted to the court. Damages in the amount of 3 times the property's assessed value are awarded to Captain Khan. Additionally, the court orders the creation of a monitoring system for all HOA foreclosure actions involving active duty military personnel and elderly homeowners. Patricia Wilkins, facing separate criminal charges, sat ashen-faced at the defense table as the judgment was read. Our eyes met briefly, her confident demeanor completely shattered. 2 weeks later, I returned to the same courthouse for Patricia's criminal trial. The prosecutor, Andrea Michaels, was a sharp-witted woman who had built a reputation for going after white-collar criminals. The courtroom was packed with residents from Sunridge Valley, many of whom had suffered under Patricia's tyrannical rule. "Your Honor," Andrea began her opening statement, "what we have before us is not merely an overzealous HOA president. Patricia Wilkins orchestrated a calculated criminal enterprise that systematically targeted the most vulnerable property owners in our community, the elderly, the infirm, and the brave men and women serving our country overseas. Over the next 5 days, the evidence mounted inexorably against Patricia. Jessica testified about the target list, and how Patricia had specifically added my property after learning of my deployment. Charles Wilkins, securing his plea deal, detailed how Patricia had meticulously planned each foreclosure to ensure maximum profit with minimum resistance. She would celebrate when she found out someone was deploying, Charles testified, avoiding his wife's glare from across the courtroom. She called it harvesting season, when military orders came through. Bank records showed Patricia had pocketed hundreds of thousands in kickbacks from the artificially low sales. Most damning was an audio recording Jessica had secretly made of Patricia laughing about how soldiers are too busy getting shot at to worry about HOA fees. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning with their verdict. Guilty on all counts: mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, racketeering, and violations of the Service Members Civil Relief Act. At the sentencing hearing 2 weeks later, several victims were allowed to provide impact statements. I watched as elderly Mrs. Garcia, who had lost her home of 30 years while in the hospital recovering from a stroke, tearfully described how she now lived in her daughter's spare bedroom. When my turn came, I stood in my formal uniform, medals displayed. Your Honor, while serving overseas, I carried a photo of my grandfather's house in my wallet. It represented everything I was fighting to protect: home, family, the American dream. Patricia Wilkins didn't just take a building, she attempted to erase my family's legacy for personal profit. But the damage she has done extends far beyond my family. She has undermined the security that service members need, the knowledge that their homes and families are protected while they risk their lives for this country. Judge Marshall, a Vietnam veteran himself, nodded solemnly as I spoke. When it came time for sentencing, he addressed Patricia directly. "Mrs. Wilkins, you have exploited the very people who protect our freedoms and way of life. You targeted those who could not defend themselves because they were defending us. This court cannot allow such behavior to stand." His voice hardened. "I hereby sentence you to 8 years in federal prison, $1.2 million in fines, and permanent prohibition from serving in any HOA or property management capacity. Additionally, you are ordered to personally write letters of apology to each victim of your scheme." As the bailiff led Patricia away in handcuffs, her designer suit replaced by a prison jumpsuit, I felt a complex mix of emotions, not celebration, but a somber satisfaction that justice had been served. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around us. Sarah addressed them with composed professionalism. "Today's verdict and sentence send a powerful message. Those who target the homes of deployed service members will face serious consequences. The Service Members Civil Relief Act exists for a reason, to protect those who protect us." A reporter thrust a microphone toward me. "Captain Khan, how do you feel about the sentence?" I thought carefully before answering. This case was never about revenge. It was about accountability and ensuring that other service members don't face what I did when they return home. No one who serves this country should have to fight a war abroad and then fight to keep their home when they return. In the months that followed, Patricia's case became a catalyst for legislative change. I was invited to testify before Congress about strengthening protections for deployed service members' property rights. New laws were passed requiring multiple verification steps before any HOA could foreclose on a property, with special provisions for military personnel and elderly homeowners. I used a significant portion of my settlement to establish the Mitchell Khan Foundation, named for my grandfather and dedicated to helping military families facing housing injustices. Within its first year, we had already assisted dozens of service members in preserving their homes during deployment. Jessica Turner, whose courage had been instrumental in bringing Patricia to justice, became our foundation's first full-time employee. "I want to help fix what I was once part of," she explained simply. 14 months after my return, almost exactly 2 years after I had deployed, I stood on the porch of my grandfather's fully restored Victorian home. Every detail had been painstakingly recreated, from the ornate crown moldings to the creaking third step on the staircase. Mrs. Lombardi joined me for the unofficial housewarming, bringing her famous apple pie. "Your grandfather would be so proud, Amir," she said, patting my arm. "Not just of the house but of how you fought for what's right. How many families have you helped now through that foundation of yours?" 57, I answered, watching the sunset paint the neighborhood in golden hues. "And we're just getting started." Charles Wilkins, who had received probation in exchange for his testimony, had been ordered to personally supervise the restoration of my grandfather's house as part of his community service. Initially resentful, he had gradually developed a respect for the craftsmanship of the old Victorian. "I never understood why people fought so hard for these old houses," he admitted on his last day. "But rebuilding this place, I get it now. There's history here. Soul." I nodded, accepting his words without offering forgiveness. Some betrayals can be understood but never excused. Inside the house, the walls once again held photos of 3 generations of my family. On one wall, I'd added a new frame, containing the court ruling that had restored justice and preserved Grandpa's legacy. Beside it hung a framed copy of the Strengthened Service Members Civil Relief Act, now informally known in legal circles as the Khan Amendment. "Captain Khan," called a young airman approaching up the walkway. Since returning to active duty, I'd requested assignment to a special investigative unit focusing on financial crimes against military personnel. "What is it, Airman Jensen?" "Another potential HOA case, sir. This one's in Colorado Springs, specifically targeting families of deployed personnel." I accepted the file, determination rising within me. Patricia Wilkins and her corrupt HOA had learned a hard lesson. They picked the wrong house, the wrong family legacy, and definitely the wrong Air Force intelligence officer to mess with. As I welcomed Jensen inside to discuss the new case, I felt Grandpa's presence in every corner of the restored home. Some fights are worth every ounce of effort. And because of this one, his house would indeed see many more generations of our family, just as he had wished. Inside, on the entryway wall where generations of Khans had marked their heights in pencil, I had carefully preserved every mark and measurement. And at the bottom of the wall, I'd added a small plaque with Grandpa's favorite saying, words that had taken on new meaning through this ordeal: "Stand your ground. This is what home means." The following weekend, I hosted a barbecue for the entire neighborhood, a proper homecoming celebration. As twilight settled over Maple Street, neighbors gathered in my backyard sharing stories and laughter. Mrs. Lombardi raised her glass in a toast. To Amir, who showed us all that one person can stand up against injustice and win. I smiled but shook my head. Not one person, I corrected gently. I had help, from all of you, from Sarah, from Jessica. That's the real lesson here. When we stand together, the Patricius of the world don't stand a chance. As the stars came out above us, I gazed at my grandfather's house, fully restored, lights glowing warmly from every window. In the distance, I could hear a military transport plane taking off from the nearby base, carrying more brave men and women to protect our way of life. Thanks to what we had accomplished, they could focus on their mission knowing that their homes and families were a little safer now. That was worth everything.